Near the end of Jean-Paul Sartre's play No Exit, something extraordinary happens. Three people have been trapped in a room together, told that this is hell and they will be staying in one another's company for eternity. But there are no torture devices, demons, or fire. Just three people and the judgments they pass on each other. And then, after what feels like an eternity of psychological torment, one of the characters actually has the ability to leave the door. To everyone's shock, the door swings wide open. He is free to leave. But he pauses and decides that he needs to stay. Most people remember No Exit for its famous line, "Hell is other people." But that is not the whole story. The real torture is not necessarily other people's judgment, but instead that the characters refuse to let go of their idealized self-images, and they need other people to validate those images, even when those same people are driving them insane. The door to hell is wide open, but they choose to stay locked inside of themselves. The play opens with three people arriving in an ornate living room. Garson, a man who was shot for deserting the army. Estelle, a woman who had an affair and offed the resulting child by throwing the infant into the lake. And then there is Inez, a woman who had seduced her cousin's husband, Florence, and continued to torment him emotionally until Florence offed them both by leaving the gas on the stove. But what makes them perfectly suited to torture one another is not exactly what they've done or why they did it, but it is who they think they are despite what they've done. Garson is desperate to be seen as brave instead of a coward, and Estelle is desperate to be seen as beautiful and desirable. And Inez, the only one who sees through both of them, is still desperate to possess Estelle's attention. When they first arrive, Garson and Estelle immediately try to hide what they've done, presenting themselves as morally upstanding people who perhaps made some mistakes. Inez is the only one who admits outright that she was cruel and enjoyed being cruel. And this difference determines how much each of them suffers. Garson keeps talking about his pacifist principles, trying to frame his desertion as a principled stand rather than an act of cowardice. But he himself seems to know that this is just a justification he applied afterward. Estelle clings to her outward appearance as someone who is helpless and someone that things happen to rather than someone who makes deliberate choices. She talks about her child's death as if it was an accident, avoiding the direct acknowledgement that she deliberately threw the infant into the lake. What Sartre is showing us is that when we do things that contradict our moral self-image, we face a choice. We can either update our self-concept to include the fact that we are capable of moral failures, or we can maintain our idealized self-image and shove the contradicting evidence into a dark corner of our minds. Garson and Estelle choose the second option. They need to see themselves as good people, despite having done terrible things, and this creates a cognitive dissonance that tortures them constantly. They know what they did, but cannot acknowledge it directly, because that would shatter their self-image. But Inez does not have this problem. She freely admits that she was sadistic and manipulative. And because she is not trying to maintain a false self-image, she has one fewer layer of psychological torture to deal with. Sartre makes it explicit that there are no mirrors in hell. The characters cannot see their own reflections. The only way they can know what they look like or who they are is by asking each other. They are condemned to see themselves exclusively through the eyes of other people. At one point, Inez offers to be Estelle's mirror. And this seems helpful at first, but when Inez perceives that Estelle is showing interest in Garson instead, she tells Estelle that there is an ugly spot on her chin. And this devastates Estelle because she has no way to verify whether Inez is telling the truth. She is completely dependent on another person's judgment with no independent way to check reality. Garson needs the two women to validate that he's brave. Estelle needs them to validate that she is beautiful. And Inez wants Estelle to validate her worth through returning the affection. They are all trapped looking at themselves through the distorted mirrors of other people's perceptions. But Sartre's deeper point is that this is already how we live. We don't actually have direct access to ourselves. We construct our identities largely from how other people respond to us. You can't really know if you're funny unless other people laugh at your jokes, or if you're smart unless other people treat you as intelligent. We are all already dependent on others to tell us who we are. The difference is that in normal life, we can choose whose mirrors we look into. We can surround ourselves with people who reflect back the image that we want to see. But in hell, there is no escape. After many, many, many hours of this psychological torment, Garson demands that the door be open. He bangs on it and tries to call the valet in a desperate attempt to escape this torture. And then, to his complete shock, the door swings wide open. He is free to leave. So he stands there in the open doorway, and freedom is at his fingertips. And instead, he turns around and says he cannot leave until Inez admits that he is not a coward. He looks at her with desperate pleading and says that he cannot leave her there gloating over his defeat with all of those thoughts about him running around in her head. But the door to hell is literally open. He can escape this eternal torment. But his ego will not let him leave, because someone he doesn't even like refuses to validate his own self-image. He would rather be tortured forever than have Inez think of him as a coward, without him there to argue otherwise. And this is the moment where Sartre reveals what hell actually is. It isn't necessarily other people's judgment, but your ego's absolute dependence on other people's judgment. Garson has made being brave so central to his identity that without that validation, he doesn't know who he is. That self-image has become more important than his actual self. And this is textbook narcissistic fragility. Clinical narcissism is not just thinking that you are a great person, but instead having a grandiose but incredibly fragile self-image that must be constantly defended and validated. The narcissist cannot tolerate any information that contradicts their self-concept. When Inez refuses to validate him, Garson becomes aggressive and violent. And when that doesn't work, he turns to Estelle, desperately trying to get her to tell him that he is brave. He cannot update his self-concept to match reality. He can't simply say, I acted out of fear in that moment, and that's something that I have to live with. Because that would require letting go of an idealized version of himself. And Estelle does the exact same thing. Her entire identity is built around being beautiful and desirable to men. And when there are no mirrors, she needs Garson to validate it by desiring her. She throws herself at him repeatedly because she needs his desire to confirm that she still exists as the person she thinks she is. The suffering both of them experience comes from the gap between their idealized self-images and reality, combined with their absolute refusal to update the self-image. They need reality to conform their ego, rather than updating it to match reality. And the irony is that this makes the narcissist incredibly dependent on other people. They think that they are self-sufficient and strong, but actually they need constant validation and cannot function without it. Garson thinks he is strong and brave, but can't even walk through a door without Inez's approval. His strength is entirely dependent on others confirming it, which means he has no strength at all. So the prison is not the room, but instead the ego. Garson could leave the room, but he can't leave because he can't leave his self-image. He and the others are trapped inside the story he tells himself about who he is, and that story requires other people to validate it. And we all do this. We construct identities based on fixed ideas about who we are, like being smart or responsible, or a person who never quits. And then we arrange our entire lives around defending these self-images. But the problem comes when reality contradicts that same image. When a smart person fails, or the responsible person drops the ball, or even when a person who never quits faces a situation where quitting is actually the better choice. In these moments, we can update our self-concept to include this new information, which is painful, but somewhat liberating. Or we can fight reality to protect our self-concept, which keeps us in that prison. But Sartre did not write No Exit to make us feel hopeless. He wrote it to show us that we are already making a choice. Garson chose to stay in hell, and every day we are doing the same. So hell is and is not other people, but instead the ego that needs other people to confirm it's right about itself. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see y'all next time.